Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the DA special broadcast. The purpose of this broadcast is to give the public an update on various coalition agreements across the country. We made the following commitments to South Africans right after Election Day. That one, we would not go into government at all costs. Number two, that we would be guided by clear principles in all of these agreements and in all of these negotiations. That number three, we would keep you updated on the progress of the coalition agreements and the coalition talks. And number four, that once all of these agreements have been finalized, we will make them public so that you can hold us accountable. And so today I'm joined by DA leader Leader Steenhuisen and DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille, who have been leading the process countrywide since the 2nd of November. John, you've been around the country conducting various talks and agreements. What is the latest? Where are we with coalition agreements?
Thank you, Siv. Well, South Africa, as we committed to right from the beginning, we wanted to have an open and transparent conversation with you at home. You don't need to rely on getting second, third, fourth-hand information. You can hear it directly from the DA right here, the facts as they are. And what we want to do today is give you a comprehensive briefing about where we're at with coalitions, what the lie of the land is, and what to expect in the coming weeks. So it's really great to be with you this morning, and thank you very much for tuning in to hear directly from us where things are going. I also think it's a very exciting time to be alive in South Africa. For the first time in our country's history, the ANC is below 50% nationally, and that started to open up a number of opportunities for us to really shake up the political landscape. And so I do think that election 2021 is going to be remembered as one of those elections where the huge cracks in the dam wall of the ANC's impenetrable majority were rendered asunder and started to leak out. And this is hugely, hugely important for 2024. 30 months away, around about 896 days away from the next national and provincial elections. And so what we've been very clear about doing is that we are looking at every situation today, not with an eye on this week, this month, this year, but also towards the 2024 elections, where we believe the real game is going to start to change in South Africa. We're going to break that logjam of South Africa's politics and start to put together a new majority at the core of the rational centre. But obviously, we've got to start with coalitions and putting governments together here in South Africa and at this particular time. And so the big thing is the complexities of coalition forming in South Africa are so much more complicated than in many other places in the world. And one of the things that's a huge pressure on this situation is that the law only gives you around 2 weeks to be able to form stable, effective coalitions. Now, if you look at coalition negotiations in other countries around the world, they often go on for weeks and months and sometimes even a year before a coalition agreement is hammered out and the parties are able to proceed on a stable, principled basis. All of that is compressed into just 14 days in South Africa. And the irony is that while South Africa's electoral system clearly points to the fact that because we have a proportional representation system, that there would inevitably be coalitions, our legislative framework is trapped in a winner-takes-all, first-past-the-post system. And so this makes it very, very difficult. So we will be obviously trying to ensure that before we get to council meetings, have got a strategy and a clear path of engagement going forward. I think it's very, very important that we don't just rush into coalitions for coalition's sake. We learned a lot of lessons as the DA over the course of the last 5 years, and those learnings are being applied to the processes that we're undertaking over this period of coalition negotiations, to learn from those mistakes, to grow on the success stories from those that experience, but also then to be able to focus on stable, solid governments that are going to be able to deliver services for the people of South Africa. And that has to be our priority. So where are we sitting at the moment? Well, I've got some breaking news because I'm going to start with the lists of our overall majorities. So you heard it here first. Siviwe Helen Midval, just in. Peter Texera, elected as the mayor. Alan McLaughlin elected as the Speaker. So well done to the two of them. That's Midvaal Municipality in Gauteng, which is, as you know, a DA majority. We're also busy putting together the governments, and our federal executive has been spent the last week signing off candidates, signing off MACOs, signing off various appointments in those municipalities. City of Cape Town, Bergrivier, Swartland, Drakensberg, Stellenbosch. Yesterday, Mayor Geesie van Deventer was elected in Stellenbosch, and well done to her and her wonderful team there, and her Deputy Mayor Jeremy as well. Overstrand, Swellendam, Hessequa, Mossel Bay, Kocha, and of course Umgeni. And I was up in Umgeni last week, supposedly for the inaugural council meeting, but we saw what the remnants of cadre deployment have done there. We had essentially a municipal manager had been suspended by the council trying to preside over the council meeting in an unlawful way. And it just reinforces once again why one of the key solid values and principles that guides the DA in any form of realignment is a capable state where appointments are merit-based. And we've included that in the coalition document, that appointments in the municipality must be merit-based. We've got to rid local government of that scourge of cadre deployment. Then we've completed a number of coalition agreements already, and I can report today that in Matsekama, there was a DA mayor elected on Monday, and that's a coalition agreement with the Freedom Front Plus and the DA. In Cederberg, we've finalized and signed off the deal with the Cederberg Eerste, as well as the Freedom Front Plus. And very interesting there, sticking to one of the DA's federal executive principles that guided us, that the bigger party in the coalition should get the mayoralty. We've acceded to that in Cederberg, and so the Cederberg Eerste, who got the most seats there, will be occupying the mayor's office in that municipality. And I think that's an important principle, because in any coalition, you've also got to give effect to the reflected will of the people in that particular municipality. And so that's why one of our principles is that the bigger party gets the mayoralty. And we've shown that we live out that principle. Even when we are required to form coalitions, we've acceded to the fact that Cederberg Eerste got more votes than us. Therefore, they should take the mayoralty in that position, and we will wish them and support them well. Then we've got a number of coalition agreements that are currently in progress. These are in Saldanha Bay, Witzenberg, Breedevallei, Langeberg, Theewaterskloof, Cape Agulhas, George, Bitu, Dr. Beyers Nordeer Municipality in the Eastern Cape, Namakwa in the Northern Cape, and Siatemba in the Northern Cape. And Helen Zille and the provincial leadership, as well as the federal negotiating team, flew up to these parts of the Northern Cape last week to go and conduct those talks. And we are really confident that we will soon be able to announce coalition governments in a number of those hung municipalities. NASDA this week resulted in a tie between the parties on the council, and so that meeting will recur again on Thursday, and we hope to be able to form an opposition bloc there to be able to bring good governance and accountability to Knysna. And then, of course, we've got Prince Albert and Oudtshoorn, but obviously the numbers there are a lot more difficult. Then in terms of the metros, and I know this is the one that everyone's watching, and obviously the numbers there and the results have thrown up a huge number of very highly complex configurations of parties. And it is proving quite a challenge to bring people together around a common set of values and principles to form those coalitions. But we've been heartened. There have been a number of talks. We've had bilateral engagements with Action SA, the Freedom Front, as well as the ACDP. Up there, we had a meeting yesterday of party leaders that included the Freedom Front, the IFP, the UDM, the ACDP, Action SA, and the Patriotic Alliance. And I'm sure that I will deal with a little bit more about the outcomes of that yesterday. But the meeting essentially ended with us agreeing to go back and have a look at what is possible in the metros and to continue the engagement ahead of trying to be able to form a key government there. Now, it's very important as well that I stress to you that the DA is not a one-man or one-woman show. We're a party of due process and a party of process within the organization. And that's why every step of the way, the federal executive negotiating team has reported back to the FedEx. And the FedEx gave us some very, very, very clear guidance over the course of our last federal executive meeting around how we should be proceeding on behalf of the DA in these meetings. And those key principles around making sure that we do not go into any governing coalition, any power sharing, any sharing of executive power with either the EFF or the ANC within those councils. We don't want to be in government with either of those parties. We want to be able to set very clearly the alternative, and our first prize obviously is to work with those opposition parties. Just in terms of the other principles there, that we're not going to just rush into coalitions for coalition's sake, that we are prepared, if we cannot put together a coalition based on principle, value, on a shared program of action, all of which are set out in a written coalition agreement, which the parties must become legal signatories to, then we are quite prepared to step back, take our seats on the opposition benches, and be an excellent official opposition in any of those councils, like we are in legislatures and in Parliament here in Cape Town. And there is a huge role to play for an effective, efficient opposition. What the federal executive has also tasked us to do is that where we do take up our seats on the opposition benches, that we work with other opposition parties to form voting blocks that will allow us, particularly given the fact that the numbers are so fractured in these councils, that will give us a significant block to influence the budget, the IDP, as well as many other allocation processes within that municipality. This is on an eye to ensuring service delivery, ensuring proper, effective governance for the people within those municipalities. And so it's not a case of us wanting to get into government at all costs. And also, it's not about positions at all costs. It's got to be about principles and values and a program of action. If you don't have that solid foundation and you base any coalition on who gets what position or who gets what spoils or who gets to dispense largesse, you're setting the coalition up for failure. It's got to have that solid foundation of values and principles, a common program of action, and agreed objectives. Without that, we are not prepared to even have a discussion. So our discussions always start on those key things. And that is why I note that there's a leader of another party, the PA, who announced yesterday they're going into government with the ANC across the length and breadth of South Africa, including in Johannesburg, which obviously makes the path a lot narrower for the opposition to be able to try and form a bloc there. Quite odd, because yesterday was the first engagement we've been involved with the PA. We certainly did not take positions off the table, but we said, let's start from a principled basis first. Let's agree on what we want to achieve in these municipalities. Let's agree on what those values and principles that's going to guide the coalition. But of course, they wanted to steer it to positions, how many Mayco seats they can get. And when you read the Twitter feed and you read the news interviews today, you can see why. It's all about patronage politics. It's about dispensing jobs. It's about being able to influence who gets which tenders. And that's clearly something the DA does not want to get involved in. We want strong, stable, solid governments that focus like a laser beam on service delivery, not on building patronage networks that inevitably end up with state capture, with capture of municipal entities, and jobs for pals, and exactly the type of morass that we've seen municipalities descending into across the length and breadth of South Africa. And so we're very, very clear that we will do that. I then also just want to talk a little bit about the comments made by the president last week, in which he said, oh, well, if we can't get our way in municipalities, we're just going to collapse them and have reruns. Now, this is odd because it comes sort of a week after the president stood at the IEC and told parties that we must work together so that we can focus on serving the people and service delivery. Now, collapsing municipalities does not serve that purpose. And frankly, it's not as easy as the president would like South Africans to believe. And I imagine they're using this as a bit of a stick to try and pressure people into their corral. But if one reads Schedule 3 of the Municipal Structures Act, with Section 30, it's clear that when coalitions can't be formed, that the legislation itself envisages minority governments. And the only way that a council can be forced to rerun immediately is if the majority of councillors do not attend the first council meeting. Now, it's important to remember when you read that councillors not attending that first council meeting, that you read that together with the recent court judgments that the DA secured in Tshwane, where the court made it very, very clear that councillors should not boycott meetings with the simple determination to boycott a council or to collapse that particular council or its processes. And so the court has already sent a very clear warning to councillors who play with service delivery against their political objectives. Those councils should be allowed to meet and they must be able to be formulated. If a majority of councillors then attend that elective meeting, it will inevitably result in the election of mayors and speakers in terms of Schedule 3. Now, this, of course, doesn't mean it's going to be a stable government. But obviously, the first obligation which government councils that are elected this way may fail to comply with is the budget, which is only due in July next year. So the big risk in the meantime for those minority governments will obviously be motions of no confidence by other parties who are trying to muscle in or disrupt the program. But even if this happens, it cannot in itself, at least not the first one or two unsuccessful or successful motions of no confidence, substantiate a decision by an MEC to dissolve that. And I think the court was also very, very clear in the Tshwane judgments about the province's role vis-a-vis municipalities, and that there has to be a respect for that separate and independent sphere of government, that it must be allowed space to be able to perform its duties envisaged by both the Constitution and the legislation. So all in all, the idea put forward by the President that if coalitions are not set up, the legislation will kick in when we have reruns is misleading, because in our opinion, and certainly the advice that we've taken, the earliest that this could possibly happen is only midway during next year. So people mustn't be taken in by this argument that just because parties can't find each other, that there's going to be an automatic rerun. There could well be minority governments set up in a number of councils around the country, and obviously they will have to try and work out how to navigate the way forward. It's not ideal, but we must accept that the election results are a fair and accurate reflection of the will of the people in there. And just because you don't like the result shouldn't mean that you say, oh, well, let's just go for a rerun. We've got to respect the democratic outcome of an election, and we've got to do our best within the legislative framework to make it work. So that's where we sit at the moment. We're going to obviously have a few more inputs here from Helen around the technical aspects of this particular process. And then obviously, Siviwe, through you, we will take some questions. So back to you.
Thank you very much. And please, colleagues, particularly colleagues in the media, please remember that you can send through your questions that I will be fielding to both John and Helen so that we can address any questions that you may have. Helen, I'm going to hand over to you now to take us through particularly some of the technical considerations which have been made in the agreements in the various coalition governments.
Yes, thank you very much, Siviwe. It's very important for people to understand that preparing for coalitions is a long and arduous and difficult process. And we started doing that way before the election. The DA has learned some hard lessons in the coalitions that we have run for many years, and we're a learning organization. We take those lessons very seriously and we act accordingly. So weeks before the election, months in fact, we started working on a draft coalition agreement because we expected to have some coalitions in various places. And as John said, we're a party that likes to base what we do on principle and values. And that is why they are at the core of our coalition agreement. Because if people can't agree with us on the core values, things like accountability, transparency, accessibility and responsiveness, commitment to the rule of law and constitutionalism, a whole range of things here that we see absolutely pivotal, then there really is no basis for us to form a coalition. Now, we took this document to our FedEx, and it not only contains all of these core principles and values, but it also has a list of objectives that we are trying to achieve in government, obviously based on the Constitution, Schedule 4 and 5, and on the manifesto. And if you go into a coalition, you have to be prepared to negotiate, to give and take. And our idea is to include manifesto points from other parties that they would like in a coalition agreement, and ultimately to publish the coalition agreement, including those various manifesto points that we can agree on. What the coalition agreement also has is term of office priorities. Now, these will differ from town to town, city to city, because there are different crises and different priorities in different places. And so there is space for term of office priorities, and many of those will be reflected in the integrated development plans of those municipalities. And as those will only be finalized and negotiated early next year, those term of office priorities can be put as a codicil to this agreement subsequently. Then there are the mechanisms of coalitions, and those are extremely complex and difficult if you want to keep a coalition going for a full 5-year term, which is exactly what we want to do. And we thought very hard about our experiences, most especially about failed coalitions, why they failed, and how we can avoid failure in the future. We've looked at mechanisms such as a joint caucus, which would obviously include all the parties to the coalition. We have a mechanism called the Management Committee, which deals with the day-to-day mechanisms of managing a coalition, which is complex because day-to-day decisions and issues come up that can shake the very foundations of a coalition. And then we have a coalition oversight group outside of the municipality that is a key mechanism in the conflict resolution. And only then do we get to the composition of the governments, which you get to the positions and what most people think is a coalition agreement, which is just horse trading for different jobs. We do not think it is that. And the key lesson that we've learned in the past is that really it is better to be a strong and capable opposition than it is to be in a weak, shaky, ungovernable coalition where the partners do not agree on first principles. Now, as John said, Gatens Mackenzie's been very direct about this. Right from our first discussions at the Results Centre in Tshwane, he said to me, look, forget all of this stuff. What I'm interested in is money and jobs for my people, and that is what we're going after. So he was very direct. And when there is such a bad fit in terms of values, it's obviously not an ideal marriage. And one would never even think of signing an anti-nuptial contract with a partner who had such a fundamentally different outlook on the world. But nevertheless, we kept an open mind and we went to the discussions with all the opposition parties, and we have kept an open mind throughout. We would like, ideally, the best for South Africans and the best for all our towns and cities. And as John said, especially in our metros, the results are very, very complex. And putting together any majority coalition there is going to be fraught, and it may well comprise parties that have incompatible values, but we need to decide where our red lines are. And obviously we are not a one-man or a one-woman party. What we do is we take all the proposals back to our federal executive, put them on the table, discuss them at length, and take a collective decision. Where we decide not to go into coalition or where other parties can negotiate majority coalitions, we feel very strongly for the wonderful people who voted for the DA because they wanted true blue government and they wanted an honest government and they wanted progress in their cities and towns. But I'm afraid that is not what the electorate as a whole threw up there. And that is hard for people to take, especially when in places they stood in very harsh and difficult conditions to queue to vote, and lots of them did vote for us. But it is how it works. If we do not get an overall majority, we have to negotiate coalitions, and sometimes being in opposition is preferable. That is the lesson we have learned from history. So we have this coalition agreement. We've already signed it in the coalitions that we have put on the table. We obviously put it on the table as a starting point. We don't say this is make or break, do or die. And where we have had discussions, we've been completely open and prepared to add new clauses, to amend clauses, to clarify clauses, et cetera, where other parties have required that. Obviously, we do that. But because we've put so much thought into this matter over such a long period, we've come with a document to put on the table, because it's easier to start from somewhere than to start from nowhere. And we put the document on the table so that everybody can talk about it and can change it if they want to, and if that is done by agreement with the parties to that coalition. So that's what we've been doing. It's taken months in the crafting, and we are hoping that it will form the basis of a much more solid and reliable coalition pact than those we have had before.
Thank you very much, Helen. And there are a number of questions that we are going to run through. What I've attempted to do is to try and group them. There's a number of people, media houses, that are asking about the outcome of the meeting with opposition parties yesterday, particularly looking at the comments made by Gatens Mackenzie, and also what it means, the fact that the PA has now decided to go into a coalition agreement with the ANC, what it means in general. So perhaps before I go into the specific questions, John, you can just handle that, and then I'll run through the questions and allocate to both of you.
Well, I think when you look at Gatens Mackenzie's press statement that came out this morning, you can see that it's all about the position. So they've traded their support in municipalities around the country where the ANC needs it and translated it into support. ANC Deputy Mayor in Prince Albert, District Council Deputy Mayor, the Mayor of Bitu, Tevatis Kloof the Mayor, Kokama the Mayor, Witzenberg the Speaker, Oudtshoorn mayoral positions, MMC positions. And it's very, very clear from Gatens' own pronouncements today, and he's upfront and honest about it. It's not something we have to he's not trying to hide it under a bushel. He's been upfront and honest that for him, it's about positions, it's about patronage, and it's about what he can deliver to his core group of people. And that's what he's parlayed that support for in Joburg. The implications for a place like Joburg are that it narrows the path to an opposition majority considerably. Now, part of the reasons we were starting initial conversations yesterday was to try and see if we could form together that opposition coalition. Obviously narrows it slightly in Joburg, but we're not going to stop trying. We've said we left the meeting yesterday. We committed to the process. We committed to continuing the bilaterals that we're having with the other political parties, and we continue to coming back at a later stage with those parties that were there yesterday, once they had taken the agreements back, once they had got advice from their national executives and from their party leadership, to be able to see if we can hammer it out. And we're not going to stop trying to form these things until the last minute. But as I said earlier, we're not going to rush into coalitions for coalition's sake. If we cannot get an agreement based on values, principles, common objective, we will go and be the best opposition in any municipality around the country, and we will make the case for people why in 2024 they should vote for the DA, and most importantly why in the next local government election they need to give the DA a majority, so that we don't sit in these situations where we now, a week after the election, are busy trying to negotiate coalitions. If we'd got DA majorities in these governments, we would be home and dry, but nonetheless, this is the will of the voters, and we've got to work with the outcome that they've given us, and we're doing our very best to make sure that we act at all times in the best interests of the residents of that municipality, in the interests of stability, in the interests of good governance, and most important, service delivery.
All right, now that we've dealt with the outcomes of the meeting with the opposition parties yesterday, I want to run through some questions from the various media houses. Christian Du Plessis from Netwerk 24 asking Helen, why did the talks between the PA and other various parties, including the DA, what did the talks come up with? Why did the talks collapse on Monday? So if you can just make a note on that, Helen. Without the PA, the DA will not be able to form a coalition or a majority government in the councils of Johannesburg and Tshwane. It's a question. Without the DA, will the DA be able to form a coalition? Mackenzie alleges that you did not want to shake Herman Mashaba's hand, the leader of Action SA, at the end of the talks. Will you explain why not? Are you amongst, perhaps John, this is to you, are you amongst the parties that are asking for the postponement of the Tshwane Council meeting to try and reach a coalition agreement? And Helen, to you, allegedly the EFF voted the DA into power in Matsakama. Can you please explain what has happened here? Because there's quite a number of questions. Helen, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'm going to hand over to John, and then we'll run through what is still left.
Well, I think that some people have been misinformed because the talks didn't collapse yesterday at all. The talks didn't collapse yesterday at all. We agreed to meet again. And in fact, we agreed to continue bilaterals. I think perhaps Gatens Mackenzie wants to present the talks as having been collapsed so that he could justify the deal that he'd actually done before with the ANC countrywide. So I think he's trying to present them as having collapsed to justify why he went in with the ANC countrywide, not just in the Western Cape. That's the only reason I can think of, but the talks definitely did not collapse. And in fact, bilaterally, they're ongoing all the time and have been this morning as well. Then the EFF voting the DA in Matsikama, well, it was certainly no formal agreement at all. In fact, it took us all by surprise that the EFF decided to vote for the DA's mayor, Mr. van der Hoeven, in Matsikama. And I think somebody better ask the EFF that question, because I certainly can't answer it. I don't know. We can't dictate the voting patterns of other parties at all. Then shaking hands at the end of the talks. Well, you know, at the end of the talks, I don't recall anybody shaking hands. John and I had to get to the airport, and we were already late, and we grabbed our things and ran. And of course, because we were trying to determine when the next meeting would be, how it would unfold, we stood there, and I stood there with my stuff to leave urgently so we didn't miss our flights. So that's what happened, but I didn't even think that shaking hands was a thing in COVID, you know. Maybe you bump an elbow here or there, but anyway. All of these total side issues are the kinds of things that Gatens Mackenzie will want to raise to seek to justify the position that he determined to take from the beginning. And we know that.
Yeah. Just in terms of the allegation around not being able to form a government in Tshwane, look, it narrows the options considerably in Joburg. If you look at the numbers, with the PA now, with the ANC, the path to victory for an opposition coalition is made a lot more difficult, unfortunately. And so I would like to have preferred the talks to have continued before we simply just threw the baby out with the bathwater. And as I said, you know, Gatens was very keen to discuss positions. We want to discuss principles, values, objectives, because that is the sort of three-legged pot that you need the stability of before you can start to add the other ingredients into it. But certainly in Tshwane, there is very much a path to victory open for the opposition. That's the DA, Action SA, the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP, and COPE can make the 108 required to have a majority there. You add the IFP into the mix, that's another seat there. But just with those 5 parties, you can form an opposition government in Tshwane. And so there's a very, very clear path to victory in Tshwane. It's narrowed considerably in Joburg, but we're going to continue trying to find each other as political parties to see what the best way to bring stability and good governance to both those municipalities. Yes, we were part of the discussion yesterday about delaying the Tshwane meeting. As I said, there's already a compressed period of 2 weeks. Why compress it even further into 1 week? Let's rather give parties the maximum time possible to be able to form a government that's going to provide stability for the extra 5 years. What you don't want is to rush into a mengelmoes of parties without a signed agreement because you've got a council meeting to get to the next day. Let's rather be considered, deliberate, thoughtful, and careful about forming these things. There's no rush to set up the council this week. The legislation gives us the 14 days, as compressed as it is. Let's use that full time to make sure that we've got a considered decision that's going to serve the residents for the duration of the period.
Brilliant, thank you. Isaac Mashango from the Sowetan, he's already asked about the impact of the PA agreeing with the ANC and coalescing with the ANC and what that means for Tshwane. You've already handled that, so we don't have to go back. And then he's asking with regards to the DA's stance that the biggest party must get the mayoral position. Does that mean in Johannesburg the DA wouldn't be in favor of Herman Mashaba's mayorship? Do you want to answer that, or can I go through?
You can carry on. Yeah.
All right. Jacaranda, Anton from Jacaranda says we must ask the following. When can we expect a coalition announcement for Tshwane? It seems that it's the easiest metro to form a coalition there with the Freedom Front Plus, Action SA, ACDP and COPE. Will there be an announcement before Thursday's inaugural meeting? That has been largely dealt with. Paul Vicchiato from Bloomberg for John. The DA won't go into coalition with the ANC and the EFF. Is there a list of parties that it will go into a coalition with or have alliances with, or does that depend on the situation at each municipality? How are the discussions going at the main mayors? I'm assuming he wants to say the main metros, such as Johannesburg and Tshwane. I think perhaps you can handle that on the, Helen, on the particulars of the coalition agreement. Jacaranda again, Nokukanya from Jacaranda. John, if you can handle these. Time is running out and the metros are undecided. Should we find ourselves in a position where there is a rerun in election? To the best of your knowledge, does that mean, what does that process mean? And what would the DA strategy be? We've handled that question around what it means. What does the current political landscape mean for the opposition party in 2024? You can perhaps just reinforce that. Other than the obvious factors such as transparency, good track record, what have been the other key talking points during the coalitions? And which of the municipalities does the DA consider elusive? So perhaps you can go through some of those questions and then I'll move over to you, Helen, about the specifics on the coalition agreements.
Yeah, thanks, Siv. And just on the point around our position that the biggest party should get the mayoralty. Political systems, particularly PR systems like local government is made up of, allocates power to parties based on the proportionality of the votes. And that is reflected not by a party's wishes and desires, it's reflected by the votes that they received in any particular election. And it is our viewpoint that particularly when there's a huge difference between the votes garnered between, let's say, a party that got 10 seats and another party that got 40 seats, that the executive mayoralty, particularly given the power that is vested in an executive mayoralty, particularly when you go into a coalition, that should rest with the party that brought the most votes to that coalition. And that's how it works around the world. I mean, you didn't see the Conservative Party handing the prime ministership to Nick Clegg when they did their coalition with the Liberal Democrats, just as Angela Merkel didn't hand the chancellorship of Germany to the FDP, despite the fact that they were in a coalition. So generally the principle, the party that brings the most votes to the table is the party that gets to have the mayor. But what we've been very clear about, what we've been absolutely abundantly clear about, is that we want to include other parties in our coalitions and that we want to be able to provide effective positions for them on the Mayco, in various other capacities, in chairpersonships, in the legislature side. We are not about hogging all the positions for ourselves. We just believe that the party with the most votes in the pot has the most risk to run with reputational damage if that coalition falls apart, and therefore we would be, I think, failing the DA voters and failing those people who entrusted us. Because remember, this is a democratic outcome. This is what voters have said. Voters have said, we're going to give party X 29%, we're going to give party Y 16%. There clearly is a difference in the numbers there. And so there is a bigger mandate, I believe, for the bigger party. And as I said, it's a principle that we have carried out even when it means that we've had to step back from the mayoralty in Cederberg. Part of our whole of society approach is trying to work with community organizations in municipalities so that we can amend the infrastructure and environment of local government by bringing in special interest groups, bringing in ratepayers associations, bringing in community bodies and civil society organizations into the environment of local government so that we can start to turn things around significantly. And there We haven't insisted on being the mayor. We've said, you got more votes, you take the mayoralty. We're happy to take other positions within the municipality. And even where, particularly in the Western Cape, we have been negotiating, even where we only need perhaps one party to help form a majority, we've reached out to other parties as well and said to them, we would like you to join the government, because we believe that there is a very important imperative to demonstrate to South Africans, and this goes to the second question about the political landscape. I think it's very important to demonstrate to South Africans that you can have stable, multi-party coalitions that deliver services and are able to serve the residents of that particular municipality. Why is that important? Well, it's important because heading into the 2024 environment where the ANC has fallen below 50% nationally, there is a very real prospect, very, very real prospect, that post-2024 there will be provinces and the country that could well be subject to an opposition or some form of coalition. We need to demonstrate over the next 3 years to those people across South Africa that coalition governments, which have, I think, had a very bad name over the course of the last while because of the instability, the chopping and changing, the position and patronage seekers switching sides to whichever position suits them financially or politically the best, that they have got a bit of a bad rap. We want stable multi-party coalitions where we show that we can share power in a fair manner and in a way which actually focuses on delivering services. So that is what the changed landscape has meant for coalitions, which is why we again clear no unstable coalitions, because I think it sends a terrible message to the voting public that, oh, well, there they go again. These coalitions are cleaning out the way for us to be governed, where in fact our proportional representation system inevitably will always end up in some form of coalition or the other.
Helen, please, specifics around what have been the talking points around the coalition agreements and what have we been looking at? And then I'm going to take a last round of questions and we're going to wrap up.
Well, it's been very fascinating in the discussions with other parties that there have been very few fundamental disagreements at all with our document. Most of the people that we have spoken to have asked for some changes and some additions, and where they have complied with our value set, we've been very, very happy to include them. So it has been a very productive set of discussions, and we have learned quite a lot from negotiating them and adding different clauses and seeing things from our other partners' perspective. I think there was a question as well about, well, who would we talk to? Well, John has been very clear, and it's the mandate again from FedEx, that we would have coalition discussions with everybody except the ANC and the EFF. And we have certainly done that. But that doesn't mean to say that we do coalitions with every single party in every single place. As John said, we would like to include people, not just the ones we desperately need, but we can't include everybody at all places. And questions such as local compatibility also become important, because if there are places where it's just impossible to get A or B working together, then it is really imperative to look at the stability of the coalition going forward. If we know that it's just going to collapse in 3 weeks because it's oil on water, then it's best to go into opposition.
All right. So I have some last few questions that I've got to deal with. The SABC, Yolisa from the SABC, John, is asking if you can perhaps just singularly state the purpose of the meeting yesterday with the opposition parties and the outcome. I know you've dealt with it, but perhaps if you can just, for the purposes of the SABC, just wanting to know what was the purpose of the meeting and what the outcomes were. And then perhaps while you're on that, if you can deal with Jan de Lange's question around, doesn't the election result make it clear that voters want a government of national unity, especially in the metros? In other words, that agreements between the ANC and the DA should be concluded or included. And then last two questions from Lizega from Email and Guardian says, from what we can tell from your statement, there have been no firm commitments made by smaller parties on possible coalitions. Are we to assume that you're making no real progress on these talks given the time constraints? Yes, the Patriotic Alliance was direct and indicated that they wanted jobs and positions for PALs. Have other smaller parties like Action SA, which took a chunk of votes in the metros, indicated what they want out of any of the agreements? Previously, we've seen some council members going against party leaders and voting with the opposition. Is there any fear that this might happen again? And then the last question from Arthur from Heart FM. You've lost some votes in the Western Cape, apparently Good and the Patriotic Alliance, and lost a few municipalities like Oudtshoorn and Knysna. How would you describe your performance in the province? Perhaps, Helen, you can handle that. But, John, if you can just take us for the SABC on the outcomes of the meeting and the Government of National Unity and what have been some of the firm agreements, if any, with the smaller parties.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. Thanks for the questions. Well, what was the reason of the meeting? Well, it was for opposition parties to come together. There have been a number of bilaterals taking place between parties. So we've been having bilaterals with the ACDP. We've been having bilaterals with the Freedom Front. We've been having bilaterals with the Action SA. It was to try and get everybody in the room yesterday, with the PA included, to see what was possible. Now, obviously, Mr. McKenzie has chosen to walk away from that process, and that is his right. But we remain committed to finding a path to power for the opposition bloc in South Africa to be able to take power there. And that was the outcome was that there were parties there that needed to go back to their federal structures or their national leadership and get a mandate from them to come back on certain of the issues that were discussed there. For instance, the coalition document, the principles and values contained therein, any additions or subtractions to that document. And so the meeting yesterday, at the conclusion, committed that we would meet again and obviously be able to put on the table more firm positions after having allowed those people who were representatives of their party yesterday to consult with their relevant leadership structures. Jan de Lange makes the same point that a number of the talking heads in South Africa have repeatedly made, that, well, the ANC's now come below 50%. Now it's the DA's job to help them out of this particular situation. The reality is that, as I've said it the last time we spoke, that it's not the DA's job to save the ANC. Our job is to save South Africa and to focus on forming stable governments. Now, we've been in this government of national unity scenario before. It happened after 94. It fell apart within a year. We've seen other examples internationally where a strong, dominant liberation party falls below 50% in an election. It should vacate office, but inevitably ends up with the opposition being press-ganged into propping it up. And the best example of this is what happened in Zimbabwe, when the MDC actually defeated ZANU-PF in an election, and then the commentariat and the pressure groups all said, oh, well, now you must come together and form a unity government. Well, I would say to you that the big losers in that were the MDC and Zimbabwe, because today ZANU-PF still continues in power. The MDC were booted out of government, and Zimbabwe remains trapped in its downward spiral of economic collapse and malaise as a result of terrible policies that have been allowed to be perpetuated precisely because ZANU-PF was thrown a lifeline by the opposition in the country. Our mission is to bring the ANC below 50% at a national level, to be able to force the spring of change in South Africa and throw off the yoke of one-party domination. It does not serve the interests of the country for us to suddenly form a government with the ANC in the metros and start co-governing with them. We want to be able to govern our own metros, to be able to set up our own clear blue water between our run governments and the ANC's governments, particularly heading into the 2024 election, where that choice is going to again be put before the people of South Africa about who they want to govern the country. And given the results of this election, I think that it's opened up huge opportunities for the opposition to be able to make significant gains. And the more we can demonstrate where we govern the clear blue water between DA-run administrations and ANC-run administrations, the better. I don't think that can happen with DA MMCs serving in an ANC government or ANC MMCs serving in a DA government. I think that Clear Blue Water is precisely the medicine that South Africa needs to be able to show it the way towards building a better, brighter future for the country of growth, opportunity, prosperity, underpinned by good governance, well set out principles, and a program of action that focuses like a laser beam on delivering services, on lifting the 30 million people who live in South Africa in poverty, out of poverty and into opportunity, and setting South Africa onto a new trajectory of growth, hope, employment, and prosperity for all.
Thank you very much, John. And before I come to you, Helen, about the performance of the DA in the Western Cape, Zinhle Mahlati had asked from News 24 about the purpose of the meeting. I think we've covered that, the purpose of the meeting yesterday with the opposition parties, and whether there was an agreement, there was consensus. I think we've covered that there continues to be conversations with the various parties that have attended, with obviously the exception of the Patriotic Alliance that has walked out. And is the DA part of the parties that are calling for the postponement of the Tshwane Council? Of course, we've said that, of course, we would like more time, and that the legislation gives us about 2 weeks to form those coalition governments. So just to make sure that Zinhle is covered, she also asked, Tshwane and Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni are all sitting this week and next week. Does the party hope to have struck agreements by then in these metros? But if you can just handle the question around the Western Cape performance, and maybe if you want to add, Helen, about the sittings and what we would like to do.
Yes, from the beginning we spoke about this election, the 2021 election, as a consolidation election. The DA went through quite a difficult unravelling between 2016 and 2019, and a lot of those strings had to be woven together again, and we had to build the organisation in many respects again. And we were delighted in 2021 that we were the only one of the bigger parties with a national footprint that actually grew since the 2019 election in 2021. So it was a very good consolidation election. But again, we must always take the key lessons out of it. And if you look across the Western Cape, the key lessons are this. Where we have governed well and really well, such as in Mossel Bay, the voters love it and they vote for us in greater numbers. Where we have taken on board people who don't share our values, who build in conflict into our organisation, who are only after positions and patronage, such as Oudtshoorn, the voters don't like it, and we go backwards. We never look at the short term. We always look at what would be the best in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. And the lesson we've learned is not to go after power at all costs, especially when inherently the contradictions and the lack of alignment is so great that you know it's not going to work. Rather go into the few places that you can really govern and govern well, because then you can have the demonstration effect of what DA governance is, and we can really do that unencumbered by people who are dragging us in directions that we can't, in terms of our own constitution and the country's constitution can't allow us to go. So in the places that we've governed well, we were also delighted with the result in Cape Town, really, given the turbulence that we've been through in the last couple of years. And so where there's strong DA government and where we've governed well, the voters recognise it and vote for more. The big challenge is in the rest of the country to understand that your vote makes an enormous difference to the way you live, and complex coalitions between incompatible partners doesn't improve that.
Thank you. John, if you can please just conclude for us, and just making sure that I've just added some of the questions that may have been missed around, what has eventually been agreed to. To the members of the media that are asking, we will give you a list of all the, firstly, the outright governments that we have, also where coalition agreements have been reached as well, so that you can have that on hand. And then, of course, you will just give an update of where we are generally, and we will conclude.
Well, thanks very much. And thanks for everybody that's tuned in to hear directly from the DA. about where the DA is at, what our views and opinions are, what our thinking is. And we believe that this is important. This transparency is absolutely important so that you are provided with a clear, unambiguous position from us about where we're at. It's very easy to be caught up in the weeds on social media and other platforms. This is our commitment to taking you into our confidence and keeping you updated. So as the talks proceed, there will be more broadcasts like this, more direct broadcasts, where we will tell you what the progress is and what we're hoping to achieve. We also, as I've committed previously, once the coalition agreements are signed by all parties and are vetted and approved, that we will publish those documents. They will be publicly available so that everybody, no matter what corner of the municipality you live in, no matter what ward of that municipality you live in, no matter what street you live in, you will be able to have a copy of that coalition agreement so that you fundamentally understand why we've gone into the coalition, what the underpinning of that coalition is, and what we hope to achieve and deliver for you over the course of that 5-year period. So please make sure that you keep up. We'll obviously keep you updated on our various platforms when those agreements become downloadable, and we look forward to being able to share them. We're going to continue having talks. You know, the process is not over by a long way. There's still some time to go, and we will continue with the talks. We've kept the door open with all parties, except, of course, the EFF, and we're willing to talk to them about how we can form stable governments that are going to focus on serving you and delivering services and improving your life and giving you and your family a better hope for a better future. That is our commitment to you. We will always act not in the party's best interest, not in individuals' best interest, not for positions of patronage. We will focus on how we build governments that deliver for the people of South Africa. And obviously, as I said, this is not a one-man show. It's not a two-person show. The DA is a party of principle, process, and procedure. All of our agreements will be signed off by our federal executive, who have provided incredible guidance to us over this period. I want to conclude by congratulating all of those DA councillors who've been sworn into office to date, all of our mayors across the country who have already been sworn in, and those who are about to be sworn in the coming few days, and wish you all the best for the future. Let's get out there and deliver for the people of South Africa. Let's put that clear blue water choice before the people of South Africa, so that going into the 2024 elections, they know exactly where they need to place their cross. Let's get out there and get things done.
And thank you very much. Thank you to everybody at home for tuning in. Thank you to members of the press for sending through your questions. As we have committed, we will continue to update you as this process goes on to let you know where we are, what agreements have been reached. And remember, we have committed to make these coalition agreements public. As John says, they will be made public on our website so that you can hold us accountable as we go towards 2024. Thank you very much for tuning in.